The NBA draft is an event every basketball fan tends to gravitate towards because it's when their favorite team can bring in fresh new talent to develop and hopefully help the future of that franchise. With 60 selections being made though, it can sometimes get overwhelming to stay in the know on all of the prospects, so a good way that outlets familiarize their readers and viewers with the playstyles of these prospects is by comparing them to other players that were in the league. Sometimes these comparisons prove to be pretty accurate and helpful, but other times we see some look pretty dumb in hindsight. That's exactly what we'll be discussing in today's video, as we will be going through 5 players that have made their initial draft day comparisons look pretty terrible, either by drastically outproducing the player that they were compared to, or simply by playing nothing like the player that they were initially compared to as well. Also, the comparisons referenced in today's video have all come from the website NBADraft.net, who provide excellent year-round draft coverage, but as we are about to see, nobody's perfect. The first player that is making their draft day comparison look pretty dumb in hindsight is Fron Vagner, who was compared to Nemanja Bjelica at the time of the 2021 NBA draft. It's so funny seeing a lot of comparisons made for white players at the time of the draft because people refuse to go any deeper than just comparing them to another white guy that was the same height. Nemanja Bjelica, like Fron Vagner, is 6'10" and a white European, but that is literally where the similarities between these two players end. I genuinely can't think of a single similarity in the way that they play basketball, and that's saying a lot. Bjelica carved out a 7-year NBA career as a stretch 4 role player that was out there pretty much solely to space the floor and shoot threes when the opportunities presented themselves. Just about half of his shot attempts came from the three-point arc, he knocked them down at a solid 38% clip, and while he wasn't bad on the ball, he just was pretty big and slow, so even at his peak, he was a 4th or 5th option on the court at any given time. Fron Vagner is pretty much the inverse of that. Vagner is already reaching star caliber upside, coming off of a season where he doubled Bjelica's career scoring average for a season. Vagner is very much a player who is at his best with the ball in his hands, attacking off the dribble. He's a slasher who wants to break his defender down and get to the rim, and he's actually one of the worst three-point shooters in the league, so his biggest weakness is Bjelica's biggest strength. This comparison doesn't just look foolish because of how much higher Wagner's upside has been from the start, it's bad because there isn't even a slight match in playstyle. The next dumb draft comparison we're going to take a look at is Tyler Herro, who at the time of the 2019 NBA draft was compared to Nick Stauskas and Joe Harris. Surprise, surprise, we've got another comparison where the basis of it just comes down to seeing a white guy and insisting that he must be like the other white guys that play the shooting guard position. Nick Stauskas would only go on to play one more season in the NBA after that 2019 draft happened, so his career was already fizzling out when this comparison was published, making it even more disrespectful considering Herro was a lottery pick at the time. Stauskas was a staple of the process-era 76ers squad during their tanking, and his role was to knock down threes at a high level and hopefully provide some use as a secondary ball handler. Ultimately though, his three-point shot never quite translated as good as many hoped. He was a huge liability on the defensive end, and he didn't really provide any creativity on the ball to be trusted in a higher usage role. With Joe Harris, we at least got to see him reach the top of the sharpshooting world, as he was a pretty useful role player at his best and led the NBA in three-point percentage twice in his career, but he too was not very good on the ball, and he peaked as a 14-point per game scorer who did pretty much all of his work spotting up and finding his looks naturally within the flow of the offense through his off-ball movement. Tyler Herro, meanwhile, is a naturally gifted scoring talent, but who is at his best creating off the dribble with a lethal pull-up jumper. He's growing as a passer, and he was just named an all-star last season. Herro's got a tight handle, he's a strong finisher in the paint with far better touch around the basket than Stauskas and Harris could ever dream of, and once again, we see a prospect get a lazy player comparison because of what they look like over how they actually play. The next player that has made their draft day comparison look pretty dumb in hindsight is Jaylen Williams, who at the time of the 2022 NBA draft was compared to Joshua Primo. Yes, that Josh Primo, who has failed in the NBA both on and off the court. The core of this comparison, again, stemmed from the fact that both Primo and Williams stand at 6'6", but after that, I'm struggling to see what the scouts were seeing here. Even coming out of college, Primo was a very raw player who was drafted at 18 years old and was one of the youngest in his class, but the upside people saw in him came as a scorer. As is the case with any 18-year-old, Primo was inconsistent, but he flashed a ton of playmaking and creation ability on the ball at Alabama, and in an ideal world, he would have become a go-to scoring option, but unfortunately, we don't live in that ideal world. Primo's NBA career was pretty much over before it even began, because he struggled a lot as a rookie, shooting the ball pretty poorly, and then that next offseason, he was exposed for doing some pretty weird things off the court behind the scenes that we don't need to get into in this video, but the point is, Primo was pretty much already understood to be a bust by the time that Jaylen Williams was even coming up. Williams, meanwhile, doesn't even really match on or off the court. Williams came out of college as a much more established talent, having played 3 years at Santa Clara. He was an elite defensive talent who projected in much more of a secondary capacity on offense, and even with Williams blossoming to much larger heights than anyone could have expected from him since then, and even made an all-star game this past year, especially thanks to his blossoming scoring ability, that comparison to Primo in any context still looks extra disrespectful in hindsight. The next player that made their draft day comparison look pretty foolish in hindsight is Cam Thomas, who at the time of the 2021 draft was compared to E'Twaun Moore and Seth Curry. With this one, the scouts definitely saw the shot-making potential in Thomas. I just think they got the way that he goes about getting those shots way wrong. E'Twaun Moore had been a reliable part of the rotation of some pretty good playoff squads throughout his career, but he was a career role player who got his shots naturally within the flow of the offense and spent a lot of the time spotting up off the ball. Seth Curry is a similar story where he has shown the ability to put together some nice dribble combinations to get to his spots and hit pull-up jumpers, but for the most part is best in a reduced role, spotting up and spacing the floor. Cam Thomas, meanwhile, is arguably one of the biggest ball hogs in the league, who almost primarily gets his buckets as the result of self-creation and through tough shot making. There isn't a single shot that Cam Thomas won't take, and there isn't a single shot that Cam Thomas doesn't think he can make, so he'll put all of it to the test. Sometimes that hampers his efficiency, sometimes it gets him in trouble with his coaches and teammates, but in general, overall, there's no denying that he is one of the most talented scorers in the league, coming off of a season where he just averaged 24 points per game, which is double what either Moore or Curry have averaged throughout their careers. Cam Thomas won't really be seen working nearly as hard off the ball as those two either, so his strengths as a scorer are their weaknesses, and their weaknesses are his strengths. And finally, the last player we'll be discussing that made his draft day comparison from back in 2020 look foolish is Desmond Bane, who was compared to Courtney Lee at the time. Courtney Lee was by no means a bad player at all, as he carved out a nice 12-year career for himself that began by helping the Orlando Magic make the NBA Finals during his rookie season. But he's another player who had a definite ceiling on his upside, fluctuated between being a starter and a bench player constantly, and was pretty much always the fourth or fifth option when he was on the court. He was a very good shooter who made over 40% of his threes in several seasons and hit 39% of his threes for his career, but he was never really utilized as a ball handler or creator on the ball. When Desmond Bane was coming out of college, the consensus also viewed him as a bit of a one-trick pony, who shot the ball very well at TCU, but nobody really expected him to be a go-to scoring option in the NBA. Well, Bane's progression has been strong and steady every year over the last 5 years, and now he's not only still one of the best volume three-point shooters in the whole NBA, but he's also now a borderline all-star caliber combo guard who operates a ton on the ball, creating his own offense, and is even flashing much improved playmaking instincts, dishing out over 5 assists per game in each of the last 2 seasons. Bane has found a way to put his strong body to use, getting to the rim and finishing well around the basket, and that's just not an element that Courtney Lee ever really had in his game throughout his career. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about these old comparisons for these players in hindsight. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.